Alrighty, so kind of starting off the new year. I know I've done one live stream already for what I'm going to do different, but I'm going to actually get started with it, which is basically going through my new book. And we've got Zarina from The Rational Female. Good to have you here. Thanks for being here. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Good morning, Khaled, and good morning, everyone.
Great. So I keep forgetting if I've told you this, but this is my plan, and you're kind of part of my plan. So I hope I've told you this. Um, what I'm doing, trying to do a lot of things new this year, and I'm trying to focus on less people. Most people are always trying to get more and more views and involve more and more people. I will be just talking to different people, but I like to have a very clear focus on who my kind of target audiences for my book. So probably need to rewind a little bit. All my happiness classes are always based on, well, were originally based on a book that I was making. And so I'll be sharing how to get to that book. It's already in the link to in the description. And then I thought, out of all the different people I've been talking to, probably you and maybe your uncle feel like really aligned with the kind of things I want to talk about. I've been talking to all sorts of people who completely disagree with me. They're completely misaligned. And that was last year and the year before, where I was trying to get people from a wide background. And I think it was helpful. I think maybe, I'm not sure if we necessarily agreed in the beginning. Like you called yourself an Islamophobe before, and so maybe we're on different sides of the spectrum. But given our discussions offline, I kind of feel like maybe I got the misunderstood things. But anyway, yeah, that's what's going on. How do you feel about being part of my plan?
It sounds wonderful, Khaled. I mean, yeah, we've talked about your project regarding the book that discusses, many chapters on happiness. I think this is really important as well, 'cause especially in the modern West, there's a lot of problems with people suffering from unhappiness, people feeling quite stressed and quite ill, and people being, diagnosed with certain afflictions. So I think that ultimately anything that's going to help give people that sense of spiritual contentment and make people feel better is really, really good for them. So yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to being a part of your book. And I think as well regarding Islamophobe, my position, just to make this absolutely and utterly clear, my main issue has really been with certain extremist sects of Islam. I've always maintained that. I've never really, I think the problem is that people who are critical of any part of Islam seem to get labeled as an Islamophobe, but I'm sure even yourself would be critical of some aspects of Islam, Khaled. So by extension, does that
People,
not make
yeah,
you, well,
yeah.
that by extension, does that not make you an Islamophobe? You know what I mean? It's such a silly term.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
like this is a bit like calling someone a misogynist just for hating feminism. It's like if you criticize a certain aspect, like for example, if you say, hey, Islamic terrorism is a problem, that does not make you an Islamophobe. So yeah, let's make
Hmm.
that very clear.
Okay, cool. And I've shown you a bit of the book, but for other people who haven't, so there's a link that goes to, let me show how what they expect. So there's a single file which is basically the index page, and I started going through it. I wrote this actually a long time ago, so some of these don't quite match up with um, the topics I actually have written down. But anyway, the kind of topics, just so people can see, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Um, so you get an idea. So basically, what is the book? There's probably so many things I haven't explained. So what is the book? It's called Islam and the Happiness Revolution. I think it's going to be called that. That's another thing. Maybe you can help me with, Zarina, and people in the live chat, or anyway, generally in the comments. So that's the main idea of the book. It's a book for non-Muslims. So why I call it a book for non-Muslims, for two reasons. One, that you don't have to believe in Islam to be able to practice what's in the book. It's a self-help guide based on the most, I would say, the most tested and proven to work guide called Islam. So loads of people, it's the fastest growing religion in the world, loads of people following it, and it seems to be working statistically. So that's that. And so, yeah, let me just talk through, or very briefly talk about the kind of the stuff, the content in it. So I don't know, I probably need to make that even bigger actually. So you got sort of like maybe called a foundation. Maybe you can. I've got like these 3 stages. Like yeah, foundation. All the basics that you need to be happy. First of all, you need to find a direction, which we'll be talking about today. And these are all links to basically Google Docs. Anybody can probably read it. You just have to have a Google account, I suppose. Reality. What is the nature of reality? Before we can deal with our reality, we have to understand it. How to money, all the big issues: environment, government, love, God, health, success, what it is, how you can achieve it really easily, relationships, finding peace, inner peace and outer peace, and then kind of expanding to other things. Like I think I've changed to some of these already actually, but anyway, work, maybe kids and family. I think I've changed to something else. Neighbors, that's kind of the beginning of a relationship. Protesting is a big thing that people think will change. There's a lot of different topics. Goes up to, it should be up to 34 topics. But anyway, any thoughts about that so far?
No, it looks interesting. It looks like you've covered every key aspect of life. And I think this is really important as well because it kind of shows what's needed to keep society functioning, all those really key aspects of life that people think about. So, no, you've put a lot of thought into this. I think this looks really wonderful.
Cool, thanks. Okay, and then I suppose I don't want to make it too much of a long introduction, so let's get rid of that one and let's just start talking about it. So, there's different. I've got a format where I'm not going to talk about the format too much, but basically I've got a summary, the really short version of what I want to say, just in case people nod off or something or can't pay attention for long enough. And then I kind of go into more details. So there's a summary and then the details coming up. So first thing you need to do, and this is the beginning of the course, and a course is a journey where you're learning stuff and developing, changing yourself, your mindset as you go along. And if you want to go on a journey, you need to have a direction. You have to pick a good direction in the first place. Yep, I call it direction, the path to happiness. Here's basically 3 key points that I want to talk about, and there'll be actually, I think, 7 points when I go into more detail. So the first thing as part of the summary is how should you pick a path? And the first thing I think of is tried and tested. It's proven to work. So what is a tried and tested habit? So just one thing. So I'm talking about Islam here. That's the path. And I picked out one tiny aspect of the teachings of Islam. So Prophet Muhammad said, make it a habit to shake hands. It will remove bad feelings between you. Like, okay. I mean, I do know that there's I'm not sure if I'm necessarily going to read this. You can tell me, should I bother reading it directly since it's a book, or should
Well,
I
that's interesting,
paraphrase?
actually, Khaled, because from what I've gathered, most Muslims actually don't like to shake hands. So I find that a little bit bizarre.
Ah, that's already interesting feedback because
I mean, even you
um
don't shake hands, Khaled.
yes, you mean between the sexes. I mean, that is a really good point. I mean, maybe
Oh,
is
I
that what you
see.
mean? Because
Yeah,
I only
because
shake hands with men.
yeah. Also, do men and men shake hands with each other in Islam? But they
Yes.
don't shake hands with other women. I see. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
women shake hands with women and men hug a lot and all that kind of stuff. Women hug women, that kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. But men don't shake
Yeah.
women's hands only.
I
Oh, I
mean, that's
see.
already very good
'Cause yeah, because I guess
feedback.
for me, I thought of like shaking hands. I just think of like a very gender neutral thing. I guess that's how most people in the West. I mean, the only objection I can see
Yeah.
to shaking hands is germs, because I can actually really understand that. Like that's something thing I discussed that when I was with on Jana's channel. I was talking about Zishan's channel even, and I was talking about um germs, because I think a lot of people are funny, especially post COVID. A lot of people are funny regarding shaking hands. They're like, no, I don't want to shake hands because of like COVID or germs. So that I can understand.
Okay, so it's not germs. In fact, it could be, although Islam is a very clean religion,
Yeah.
in some ways, I don't want to misquote it, but there is even a degree of sharing germs between sharing drinks. I can't remember. I don't want to misquote it. But anyway, it's nothing to do with germs about not shaking hands. This is. I'll give it a quick explanation. And one of the reasons why I've got this thing out is I might even type things in, right? So I need to talk about. So I'll make a note. Talk about why, and I will mention it now. Why men and opposite sexes don't opposite sexes don't shake hands. So, um, I suppose I'll quickly explain that since you brought
I
it
have a
up.
different
So,
question actually, Kala. Does your book talk about like decorum between sexes and people who aren't together? Like, for example, say you've got like, say, I don't know, two married couples or like a boy and a girl, well, not boy and girl, but like a man and a woman, say, any kind of context. Like,
yeah,
how do men and women, because how do men and women who are not together like interact with each other? I think that's something which a lot of people need guidance on as well. Like, what is the correct
yeah,
conduct for men and women who are not married or related to interact? Because I think as well, a lot of women
hmm,
do sometimes struggle because, for example, women obviously, because as we know, I mean, Matt Walsh talked about this as well, didn't he? Like men and women perceive each other very differently. And I think, especially in the
right,
workplace as well, like women will often perceive a man in a professional sense or say, like Rex, say, for example, you're working with a man. I mean, I know this, I used to run a band, I used to work with males in my band, and it was always
yeah,
very like just music based. But
yeah,
it's like, I think sometimes there's that sense of like, miss bloodlines because a woman, for
yeah,
example, might be looking at the man in a professional sense, but the man is not always looking at a woman like that. And I think maybe without guidance, especially like it's different if the man's married or say if it's a family setting, but with single males and what is, the correct code of conduct for how, for cross-sexual interaction if two people not together. You know what I mean? Like does your book go into
yeah,
that?
yeah. I
I think
do.
that's
Yeah,
something a lot
yeah.
of people, because especially as you know, my whole thing is really, men and women are different and all that stuff, and really about how can we actually start to practically apply that in life? Because I think that's something which a lot of people don't always know how
Yeah.
to manage.
So I do have a section on relationships and I have another section on genders as well. And I bet I haven't, there's so many things I wouldn't have covered, but I do have a section for that. I'm always trying to summarize and just point out a few points. But let me just give you an idea about what you're asking. Basically, first of all, men and men between one sex, so men and men, let's say, there is a need to build a connection. And you might say, what about men and women? I'll talk about that in a second. And so this saying of Prophet Muhammad about shaking hands, there is a thing called a hormone called oxytocin, which it's called a bonding chemical, bonding hormone. So I don't know. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, of
Oxytocin.
course, of
Yeah,
course.
and so hugging, shaking hands, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I do ask a lot of things like, "Have you heard of it?" Because it's kind of like my background as a teacher. I
Yeah,
never assume anything, sort of things. So I make
real.
sure everybody's sort of on board. So yeah, so that's really helpful, and so uh, to get people together. In England, we've got the opposite problem, which is we've got, I think in Europe, the biggest, what's that space, personal space? Like they measured it on average. We've got the most. When I say we, even though I'm in Jordan now, I keep thinking I'm in England or something. Yeah, they've got the most personal space, and we need to close that personal space so people don't feel so separate and lonely, which is a massive problem in London. But what about men and women? So Islam is a very precise and understanding. It doesn't give like blanket statements. It says like, oh, men and women, that's different. And what is the difference? What is the nature of the connection between men and women? It describes the relationship as in uh a what's
Well, men
I
are
think
primarily
go on.
driven to view women as a potential mate, and I actually think that's
Yeah,
something which society doesn't like. Based on my experience of living in the society, I think that sometimes it's almost like society, as me talking this as someone in her mid-20s, has really quite gender neutral. It's like we forget that men are primed to look at women as a potential mate, because a lot of the time
Yeah.
it's very, very common for, say, in any kind of setting, for a man to say, "Oh no, we're friends. You're my friend," and I
Yeah.
think that that's what makes a lot of women get really angry and confused, because women will say, because the man will say, "Oh, well, friends," and then the women will take that and just think, "Okay, we're just friends," and then something will
Mm.
happen, and it's like you forget. And I'm not. Uh, I think that not all women my age or of my generation necessarily understand this, maybe because they haven't really thought about it. But it's like, when a man, just because a man, especially a man of, say, your potential age range, says we're friends, if he is single, you shouldn't take that. Like, that's why it's important to have boundaries. Like, for example, I don't meet up one on one with males unless we're together or there's a chance of being
In a
together. It's like,
group. Yeah.
for example, if I'm talking to, for example, if, say, because I've done a lot of, like, things in London, like, going to meetups or socials, whatever. I'm talking to a guy within the context of the group, or maybe we might be talking, about politics, philosophy, history, or something. But you always have to have that awareness, because I know a lot of
Yeah.
females, for example, they'll say things like, "Oh, you can't trust men, you shouldn't trust men." I don't think that's healthy either. I think that I've said this, it's like, this to some of my female friends, you shouldn't be so distrusting that you're just like, all men are psychos, nor should you be so naive and say all men are angels. It should be, no,
Mm.
you have boundaries. It's like, it's good to, sometimes it's just good to have some things in your mind as well. Like, that's how
Yeah.
I deal a lot with men at Speaker's Corner as well, when I talk to men
Yeah.
at Speaker's Corner. And I have to say as well, I prefer it, because sometimes I'll be at Speaker's Corner and I'll be men, even men with their wives. I'll be like, "I love the way you dress," or, "Oh yes, you look so nice," and, or, the guy, Street Mike, the
Yeah.
guy who filmed me. Like, I prefer it when men are very obvious. Like, when Street Mike talks to me, he makes jokes. For
Mm.
me, I prefer that because it's very in your face, and that's how my dad is. I think that's also very cultural, and I notice as well, like, men,
Yeah.
especially, used to be quite, specific. Black men or men of, like, other cultures seem to be more like that. They're very overt, but it does seem that largely men in this society in England or in the West, they tend to not, they tend to sort of, it's almost like they hide things. And
Mm.
I don't know, like, again, these slightly older guys, the guys with children, they're
Yeah.
very, very laid back. But the younger
Yeah.
guys, they can be very, it's like, because again, I can see things, and, again, me being me, I sort of, I try to maintain that impartiality. But it's like, I can see things, and it's like they're not always aware, because maybe they're used to, say,
Yeah.
women
So
pretending.
the way so I get what you're saying. You do need boundaries, and Islam is really clear about the boundaries in terms of being in a room alone with another man or wife, the opposite sex, I should say, but also in terms of clothes and the way. There's a way of inferring from what the Quran says, but I can't remember the exact verse. But it's a good analogy is when you've got an electric cable and you surround it with plastic insulation, like a protection. So why do you need that protection? Because although electricity is really good, so let's say the sexual energy between men and women is really good. Um, if you don't use that energy within bounds, it's really harmful. Basically, you get an electric shock and there's short circuits and everybody gets hurt. Do you know what I mean? Imagine an electric cable without any plastic wiring around it. You'd be like, oh my God, it's a bit dangerous, isn't it? And that's what's happened to Western society. It's all short circuiting. So it's not like, you were talking about single men and it can be dangerous in certain scenarios, and
It
that's
is quite
right.
dangerous. I guess the word, perhaps
Well,
again,
I
is
mean, it
blurred,
can be
unclear.
dangerous, but it could
Yeah.
be. You have to. It depends on the situation, right?
Yeah.
But what my point is that it's not that single men are bad or single women are bad or all this kind of stuff, right? It's that there are certain needs, okay, and if they're not channeled properly, just like electricity isn't channeled properly and isn't used in according to its intended purpose, let's say. So sexual energy has got purpose, what? Connecting people. Marriage is a really difficult thing, so you need a stronger connection, and men and women are opposites, so that's why you need that stronger connection, all this kind of stuff. But there's so many benefits from it. Obviously, the children, carrying on the human race, but also developing each other's mindset. So men are usually more rational, women are more emotional, but they're two different elements that are useful together. So in Arabic, there's a word shawaj, which basically describes the other pair, but it doesn't mean the same. It means like another. You can talk about a zawaj can mean the other pair of a shoe, for example. And you know, shoes, they're not the same, are they? They're one's pointed one way, one pointed the other way, sort of thing. Do you know what I'm talking about, right? And so when you're walking, it's good. If you only got one foot, you'll probably be hopping. You won't go very far and all that kind. Maybe that's so. A relationship between men and women helps people go further in their spiritual journeys and their physical journey, all sorts of things in different ways, right? So I hope that kind of makes sense that yes, we should shake hands between men and men or between women and women, but between men and women, there's a different dynamic. And it's important to understand all these different nuances. You know, it's not all the same. It's not all one rule, and it's for people's benefit. So, and I think people slowly beginning to remember the obvious, which is men and women are different. They need different rules. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Okay, so I won't write exactly, but I'll make a note. Maybe I'll make it red, and then maybe at some point we'll look at it together or something. Maybe when we come back to it, I don't know. So that's something I need to talk about. But maybe I'll just say very quickly: men and women should be protected from each other in. Oh, that's not quite right, but
Should have boundaries.
should have. Okay, cool. Should have the
Clear boundaries.
correct. Yeah, I want to say the correct boundaries because it's not like they shouldn't be connected at all. So
Mm.
that
Those tribes, because a lot of tribes or whatever, you know, like even those tribes where people like walk around with their tops up or whatever. I wonder how
yeah.
they're able to maintain those boundaries, like because I think they have
Hmm.
very clear rules and they usually have certain rites of passages. Like I think, for example, they'll do activities where like it's only women who will do certain activities. Only like I remember as well because you know I was in AA and they used to talk about that. It's like the meeting was all gender neutral. It's like the meetings, it's everyone sharing. But in terms of the
Hmm.
sponsorship, there was a very clear rule: it's only men sponsor men or women sponsor women. And the only
Oh,
exception, yeah, that was a very clear rule. And the only
yeah.
exception would be with homosexuals. Like for example, a gay man might have a female sponsor, a lesbian woman might have a male sponsor. But literally, that's a very clear rule in AA. Like in the meeting,
Yeah.
everyone interacts with everyone because we're human beings, and I think it's a bit weird as well to say men and women should never interact. Because also, and again, I think that's what I was talking about as well. Like a group setting is different from one-on-one. Because for example,
Yeah.
groups of men and women, it's not really the same professionally or whatever. Groups, I think groups of people, adults can be quite civil. It's the one-on-one thing, because also
Sure.
as
So
well, men and women, yeah.
there's a couple of things there. So I agree. There's a saying of Prophet Muhammad, which is if a man and woman to get alone together, when a man and woman are alone together, then there's a third person, which is the devil, right? And so I agree with the group sort of thing. Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So it's like a lot of people go say, "Oh, some things just happened." But things are a lot more predictable when you understand human nature. And
Yeah.
I suppose the thing about
I think you
Islam,
understand your own nature as well. Like I think people who are in touch with their, you could say, devil are much better at being because that's also what I was saying earlier about like just to reiterate, men who are very overt and expressive, like they're less frightening to me than men who are just like not saying anything. You know what I mean?
mm, I'm not
In terms
sure.
of
I
like
don't.
the
Yeah,
reality
maybe.
of
I'm not sure. A lot of people like to say they know themselves, but the way explain it like this, it's like you might people might claim to know, let's say, their mind because it's their own mind. But like, if you had a brain, would you like to do brain surgery on your own mind? You say, "Oh no, that's different. That's a physical thing." But then you go, "Well, are you a psychologist either?" And so I think a little bit of humility will make us realize we don't know ourselves a lot more. We don't know ourselves that well because some of us know ourselves better than others, and all that kind of stuff. Like if you study a bit of psychology and you read Milgram's experiment, you find out most people will easily kill somebody else given an authority just tells them you just have to wear a white lab coat and you can get somebody else to kill somebody else, sort of thing. So people go, no, that's not true, it's not possible, and that just demonstrates people don't really know themselves very well. So I think it's always careful. I'm always yeah, I would advise nobody should ever say, I don't know that I 100% know myself. We're always lying to ourselves and whatever. But there is, to some extent, we have to know something, right? And then we can discuss that. But I think it's a dangerous thing to say you know yourself and you know your own feelings, because there's so many people in society at the moment completely clashing. They can't all be right. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah. So cool. That was an interesting discussion. So the point of that first thing was that Islam is a tried and tested, it's a proven set of ideas, proven with billions of people. So not just the billions that over a billion that exist at the moment, Muslims, but over 1400 years so far as well. There's a lot of proof that it works. Then if I'm going to give a direction, first of all, it's good for it to be proven, but also as soon as I say Islam, people are going, no way, that's the wrong, that can't be the direction, because it's got it's so horrible to women and all that kind of stuff. So the next important part of my summary bit is misconceptions. And is the question, I suppose, would be, isn't Islam a religion of oppression? And then, as this is a summary, I'll give a very quick answer. Prophet Muhammad was asked by one of his followers, a Muslim, who should I love the most? And the very quick version is a link to the whole thing, but the quick version is Prophet Muhammad said, your mother. Then he said, who should I love after your mother? And he said, your mother again. And he said it 4 times, maybe 3 times. I can't remember now. I think I might have got this wrong. Maybe it's 3 times. I can't remember. I have to check it up again. But anyway, and then after he said you should love your mother, you should love your mother, you should love your mother, he said your father, and then your next of kin and stuff like that. So it shows that, first of all, Islam doesn't really oppress women. Not Islam anyway. Some Muslim men might, obviously, but at the same time, statistically, it's mostly women. 3/4 of women, I think, in the West. So, what 3/4 of the converts to Islam are women. So it tells you something. So a little bit of knowledge goes a long way. So people have a lot of misconceptions, but a few facts can help people get out of that. It and I'll briefly say a lot of things. Um, People can easily be confused if they don't do a tiny bit of studying and put their emotions to one side and actually try to think about things. So what I mean by that is, yeah, sure, if you listen to the media, you're going to think Islam's the worst religion in the world, right? But maybe ask your neighbor or ask a Muslim about the real thing, because Islam is the media's #1 most hated religion for a reason, because it's the most dangerous to breaking the elite's control over the world. So the media is controlled by the elite, and the elite really don't like Islam because Islam's the solution to the problem, sort of thing. How do you feel about that so far? Every time I talk a
Well,
lot,
again, it depends what we mean as well when we say Islam, because as we said earlier, well, I said there are a lot of problems with Islam, especially with what I would describe as Sunni Islam and the kind of intolerance, this idea of rigidity. And I guess some of the concerns many people have about Islam are really Islam, not even necessarily Islam itself, but religion in general being used as a weapon of political control. Because that's the
yeah,
danger as well. It's like, for example, when you look at ideologies like, even National Socialism, like that could be said to have been used as a form of political control. So sometimes these ideologies come out and they're presented as being a solution, but the danger can be when they're used as a weapon,
sure.
communism.
So
Yeah.
let me clarify one thing. There's only one Islam, really. But I understand why you say Sunni Islam or this Islam or Ahmadi Islam or whatever, because they seem to be very different. In fact, they are very different because and let me explain it this way. So there's a lot of discussions I have, or people I talk to who are not I haven't brought online yet. But I'll give you a very interesting. There's an interesting group where we have discussions on the Quran with non-Muslims. Okay. And so I've been debating Muslims, you might have known, Speakers Corner, but also on live streams, where the born Muslims are so rigid in their thinking that they don't care if I present a verse of the Quran and the verse of the Quran completely contradicts their point of view. They completely don't care. They'll say our leaders, our scholars told us something, therefore we're going to follow it. And the Quran actually says, do not make gods of your scholars. That means don't follow your scholars blindly. Like if you've got evidence, the Quran is saying one thing and your scholars are saying something else, then you should follow the Quran, obviously. What do you think about that? Isn't it obvious, right? And so in this group of some non-Muslims and some sort of, let's say, thinking Muslims, are often people who convert to Islam who are Westerners, and they get put off by the rest of the other Muslims, the Sunni Muslims who are born Muslim. And their points of view are completely opposite to mine. So the other day, I had a discussion with them and I said, is hell forever? And all of them were like, no, hell can't be forever. You just have to read the Quran. It's very clear. But I've had the same debates with Sunni Muslims, and all of them are like, how dare you say hell is only temporary, it's forever. You know what I mean? So you've got completely different points of view with one text. But the problem with the people who don't understand the text is because they don't want to read it. They don't care what the text says. It might be shocking for you to hear that most Muslims really don't care what the Quran's got to say. They just want to do whatever they want to do. So does that kind of explain why there's a difference in interpretation and why there seem to be different kinds of Islam?
Yeah, I think that it's really the people that can mess things up. I think that ultimately religion is supposed to be about bringing, community and bringing people together. And it does seem that it's the people who kinds of mess things up. Because I suppose as well, maybe this counteracts what I was saying earlier, but when you have boundaries, you actually have more freedom. Like, for example, when things are done in a way where it's within clear boundaries, that's where things are actually, how should I say, clearer. Like, for example, you're talking earlier about sexual energy or any kind of things when it's like, well, we're talking also about creativity. It's like when these things are channeled properly, like for example, concerts or live music festivals, when things are channeled into a space that is actually where you can actually enjoy that makes the experience richer. So I wonder if
Yeah.
sometimes maybe people who like start enacting violence or start behaving in very degenerate ways, it's because they don't have a place to express whatever fears or feelings all they have. They don't have somewhere safe that they can actually express that
Yeah.
into.
So the boundaries, I
Yeah.
would say that the boundaries thing is about, I think, the difference between organization and chaos.
Well, that's
And
I guess where you need the kind of the balance between the order and chaos. It's like to get the best of the chaos, because with the chaos, I mean, creativity is very chaotic, sexual energy is very chaotic. To get the
yeah,
chaotic, you need the order. It's
I
almost
think
like,
it seems
yeah.
chaotic on the surface, but people who are creatives do, like Picasso, for example, he would have done the same painting 1,000 times. He had
Mm.
more, and Mozart, all these famous people, Steve Jobs, in terms of technology, whatever, they put a lot of effort and they were very organized.
Well,
It's just the
exactly,
same
yeah.
with the
Yeah, yeah.
electricity. You do have to, it's not like you tell electricity exactly what to do. It can have many uses, but it has to have the boundaries, which is the plastic insulation that protects it. Otherwise, you do have chaos. Like if you had electric wires everywhere all over your house, you would feel really unsafe. I mean, electric wires without the insulation, do you know what I mean? So I totally agree with you that when you have those boundaries, things work so much more smoothly. You just have to have the right boundaries, not the wrong boundaries, not any old boundaries, but the right boundaries based on human psychology and real needs and how society really works. And that's the special thing about Islam. It's made by the creator. And there's so much evidence that it is made by the creator. You can see the rules seem to work. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So, this is something along the lines of what you're saying. So another thing people say in the West, because it's very individualistic and everybody wants to do whatever they want to do, which is not entirely wrong. It's good to have some sort of freedom to do what you want to do. But they like to say, as an excuse to avoid having any rules, this is my 1, 2, 3 of just getting people to be at least interested in Islam, is nature doesn't change. Human nature is essentially the same. You know, your brain is kind of the same brain as everybody else's brain. Your heart is roughly in the same position, all that kind of stuff. Most people have got 2 lungs and 2 legs and all that kind of stuff, right? And so a lot of people in the West nowadays, they go, you know what? Happiness is different for everybody. Everything's different for everybody because that's a way of escaping following any rules. Because like, it's, everything's different for everybody. But they know deep down that's not true. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a topic called psychology, for example. If everybody's psychology was completely different, people wouldn't be bothered with psychology. Be like, oh, okay, there are no rules. But that's not true. And so the Quran says something very interesting. It says, and follow the nature made by Allah, that's just the name of God, the nature in which He created humankind. There is no altering the creation of Allah. This is the right religion. So religion, deen, means the way or something. So basically, what I was saying in summary was, Allah has made this religion to fit human nature. There are certain rules. Of course, there's space for you to be who you need to be within those rules. Those rules aren't exactly like you can't, you know, you can't breathe or something. You know what I mean? You get enough space to be creative, but you need the rules or the proper space to be creative. Otherwise, it's a big mess.
Are there any
Uh,
Islamic rock bands, Khaled? Is there Islamic punk?
no, not really.
I find it
Maybe.
fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's by purpose though. There's kind of no accidents in this kind of stuff. It's a good question. I think I have to think about, have I done in all the chapters that I've put? I'm not sure if I've actually put creativity and I talked about music. So I'll very briefly, since you mentioned it. Islam is very careful about narcissism. Okay, and certain kinds of art and certain kinds of emotions that are not based on logic, right?
So rock
um,
music is illogical.
so there's Islam encourages, let's say, singing, vocal singing. That's 100% natural, right? But then you can get really involved, not just in music, but in food as well, and so many other things, where you over get involved in things that don't direct you to becoming a better person. So Islam is very clear about things. It's like every human being has been built with a purpose, and that purpose is on your journey towards God. And there's a lot of confusion that can be had. So you can spend ages on having more and more instruments and creating loads of different sounds that can excite people emotionally, but they don't understand where those emotions are taking them, or they can interpret those emotions in sorts of good ways and bad ways, and it's all a bit vague. And Islam wants to help people go on what is known as a straight path. Have you ever heard anybody? This is a very common thing, like going on the straight and narrow or something like that. So Islam is,
Sure, but it's interesting because, for example,
yeah,
Prince, who's one of my favorite musical artists, was a Christian, a
yeah,
Jehovah's Witness, and he was
yeah,
very, very, very religious. And
yeah.
he was obviously a rock, he's he was widely
See,
into
that's
this
the
music
problem. The
rock.
problem with Christianity has gone far away from its original teachings.
Yeah, but the
So they
thing
just do
is
anything
that
they want.
why, well, it's not doing anything you want because Prince was a musical artist, right? And that
Yeah,
was, he was expressing art and it's like he was channeling all of his passion and things into his art. And I think
yeah.
it's, well, like a lot of creative people want the space to channel their passions or whatever into art. And I think that a lot of people don't want to be told, oh, I can't express this because it's somehow, immoral or lewd. Like that's where somehow the Judaic notion comes in of like, oh, this is sinful, that, whatever, because it's like Prince was channeling all of that passion or whatever into art. And that's why I talk about rock music as well, because I think there's a stigma, especially with the rock and punk genre. Like a lot of people, like the very religious fundamentalists, say things like, oh, this is satanic. And it's quite sad because, as far as I'm aware, like a lot of, you know, rock artists or musicians, a lot of them are Christian, and it's actually quite rude because somebody's art form is being used, and almost like somebody's claiming, oh, this is satanic. It's like, well, no, it's not satanic. It's not satanic to play guitar. It's not satanic to channel certain things into art. Like, that is where
Hmm.
people get very angry, and I think that's where as well artists, because artists historically have always been very rebellious as well. It's almost like, I think that ultimately it's important to remember that's where the diversity in human expression comes in. And it's
Hmm.
important to remember that we are all different and that we can't all be one way. Like, yes, we could say, I don't know, because
I think there's a
is
lot
there
of
just one path
danger
to God?
in those ideas, right? Because at the moment, people are saying, we feel this, therefore it's right, right? We feel that I'm a man, but I feel like a woman, therefore I am a woman, right? So you might not see that, you might not connect it as the same thing, but that's where Islam says, okay, so first of all, Islam in the Quran says that wherever I say is, didn't just say this is satanic and whatever. That's just a very broad statement which doesn't necessarily help. It says wherever God says, whatever I teach you is bad for you. It's like it doesn't make any difference to God. Do you know what I mean? It's like bad for you in the sense that, like, if you do lots of this, I don't know, drinking alcohol, for example, then it's going to be bad for you in two ways. Like in this life, it's going to make your life miserable, and God makes it so that you get lots of feedback. So you're not like, when you get to the end of life, if you've had let's say, a good life, let's say a life that will lead to something good in the next life as well, or a bad life, you get lots of feedback. So it's not like you end up at the end of life and you don't know if you're a good or bad person, essentially. And you might not like the terms good or bad, but I mean, you will feel good or bad. Do you know what I mean? Because you would have had lots of physical feedback in your life saying, this is good, this makes me happy, this makes me feel good about myself. I'm not in the kind of camp that says, if you're like murdering people and you say to yourself, you know what, I'm a good person, and I'm look in the mirror and affirm that I'm a good person. No, it doesn't make you a good person. You actually have to do good things. And what is good, that's actually really complicated. People like to think it's really simple, but it's really complicated. Like, some people might say it's good to support somebody who thinks, that, a man who thinks they're a woman, to support them in believing that they're women, whatever they want to believe. Okay. It doesn't mean you should be mean to them, I think, but we shouldn't necessarily support them or encourage them to, chop off their dicks or something like that, or those kind of operations. So good and bad are a lot more complicated than we realize, and that's
Who
why,
gets to decide
yeah.
what is good or bad? Because that's the
So
other thing as
that's
well.
right. That's a really good question. So
Yeah.
it's the topic of objective morality. So at the moment, you have most people in the West live on something called subjective or normative realities. Like, whatever's normal at the moment, that's become their moral compass and beliefs, whatever society in general says, right? But that changes all the time. That can't be true. So if anybody has got the best idea of what is good and bad, and you can translate good and bad to healthy and not healthy, right? That's the Islamic understanding of good and bad. Then nobody knows the creation better than the creator, and that is God. Does that make
With
sense?
music, if somebody was given the ability to say, create, like, for example, even like, as you know, one of my favorite authors is Stephen King, and he writes in the horror genre. If
Sure.
somebody's given, say, a talent or a gift, and they're given that ability, because, like, for example, I've even heard, actually somebody said this to me at Speaker's Corner once. I was talking about J.K. Rowling, and someone was
Hmm.
saying, oh, she's satanic, and I was like, why? And they said, oh, because she's writing about witchcraft. It's like, if somebody's given abilities to tap into certain things, to explore certain concepts, who is anyone to turn around and say, oh, that's wrong? You know what I mean? Like, if somebody's
Sure.
born with
So
certain
how do you
inherent
measure ability? Because a lot of ability is measured by majority. You might say, I'm not going to, like, you might, I don't want to, since you brought Stephen King up, how do we know Stephen King is a good author? Just because lots of people bought it? Just because I'm not saying he's bad. I'm just saying, we have to question how we measure things in the first place, right? So are we measuring Stephen King as a good author just because he's the most popular author or something, right? That's not the wisest thing to do, to follow the majority, otherwise become sheep. So I'm not saying Stephen King is a bad author, but I'm saying if we want to work out what's good and bad, it makes, just as a fundamental principle, wouldn't it be best to decide if we can know this thing, and I haven't exactly proved it yet, right? But if we can know that God is the author of the Quran and giving you this guidance, and God is your creator and knows you better than you know yourself, then does it make sense as a principle to listen to God rather than the majority of human beings, if you had a choice? Because that's what if we're saying Stephen King is the best writer in the world, let's say, to ever exist, that's based on a majority, or capitalism even. I'm not even sure if it's the majority, right? So some sort of system, usually the majority or something, versus the creator. Who do we decide? Who
But
do
then
we
I
listen
suppose the
to?
real question is who speaks for the creator, because none of us know the creator, right? We're all humans. None of us can
Sure,
speak
that's the thing
for
I was gonna. So we've got lots of proofs to make it simple. So I think a lot of these things are really simple. I'll give you a very simple example. So one is you can look. The proof is in the pudding. You can see, like, there's loads of advice by the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, right? And they, after 1,000 years, there's all this scientific evidence to support them. That's one way of looking at it. You can like look at the whole Quran and all the different advices and all that stuff, and you go, oh, that seems to work. Another way, and there's many ways to prove that the Quran is the work of God, it's got lots of scientific truth that weren't known for over 1,000 years after the Quran was created, like the Big Bang. It's really clearly written. It says the heavens and the earth were in a closed up mass, and then we expanded them. And then the following, I think even in part of the same verse, and we have created all things from water or something. That's also very all living things from water. And there's another scientific truth that nobody knew. So there's all sorts of crazy things, crazy scientific truths that are put in the Quran to make it really obvious and really simple for people to know, yeah, this is from God. Do you know what I mean? So does that make sense, that stuff that wasn't, there was nowhere, I mean, even when the idea of the Big Bang came out, because now we've got used to it, we might think, oh, that's obvious, that everything was in a tiny infinitesimal dot or something. That's obvious. We've got used to that idea. But when it came out, Einstein didn't even like the idea. He thought it was too crazy. Do you know what I mean? So does that help? Like, that's a fantastic question, and it's very, very much part of what we're talking about. How do we choose the right path? Well, you want a path that is, you're sure has come from God. I mean, that's the best path, isn't it? You're not Dave's path, not Zarina's path, not Khaled's path, but God's path. That would be like, if you had to choose between.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to
Yeah.
make is that we also can't ignore the nuances within humanity, because it's
Okay.
like, and that's really my concern, is that if people are different, yes, we could say, okay, we all want to get to God, but we can't all become clones of each other. We can't all just be drones. We can't remove creativity. We can't remove individuality. We can't remove creative expression. And again, the reason why I use people like I'm bringing up, rock, punk, Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, because this side of life, you could call it, I don't know, people perhaps delving into, I don't know if you want to call it, one's shadow self almost, which is often rather expressed within art, within dress, within creative expression. This is something which, especially the Catholic Church, really banned. They tried to ban all this stuff, and they said this is all evil. And my concern is that I'm not sure to what extent Islam is trying to do the same thing, because it's like, if
Sure.
this is a side of
Okay.
life which is
Have you
very,
heard
very, very,
of death metal?
yes, of course, yeah.
Okay, sure. I mean, some people would say, I think there's one where they've got pigs' heads and they put them on the stake, and also blood, and people self-harm, and so there's all sorts of
Yeah, that's
variations,
messed up.
right?
But there's also just
But
the
you're
metal
saying, my
genre.
point is, you're saying that's messed up because that's your opinion, right? See, and somebody else might say that's fantastic and it's really healthy, right?
No,
So
I'm
there's all,
talking
you have to
about
be
metal as
careful.
the pure music genre. I'm not talking about people cutting themselves and doing weird things. I'm talking about the actual artistic genre of metal. Because there are, for example, there's people like, for example, I know guys back from when I was at uni who like were in a metal band. You know, a lot of them don't drink. It's like they're expressing their darkness or whatever, but it's all going into the music. They're not going and starting to do weird things like cutting themselves or whatever. And I think there's a lot of stigma, especially
You
associated
see,
with
you might
that
say
side
it's
of life.
weird, but they might. Let's put everything on a spectrum, right? The you might put the death metal stuff on one end of the spectrum. You say the cutoff point, or harmful, the good and bad, let's say, or harmful or not harmful, is, let's say you put the boundary at heavy metal or something, for example, right?
But the actual
So
music, the genre, yeah.
yeah. So, but then the question is, why do you get to say where the boundary is, right? And it comes to the simple way to make it, to understand it is like God says what's healthy, and then you can't. But I don't want to leave it as simply God says. You can actually delve into it, and I kind of my point is with music generally, you have to be a bit careful into sort of narcissism and also confusion. Like, what does this particular emotion, is it healthy in terms of, if you define healthy as in, is it getting you to your destination? Do you know what I mean? Or is
So,
it
I mean,
making you
people often
wander in the
report like
darkness?
punk or rock or metal. People often report
Yeah.
having quite spiritual experiences in these environments. And that's something which, again, I think because there's a lot of stigma because there was a lot of suppression largely by the
It's
Catholic
not
Church.
stigma. I think it's the wrong word, because the dangerous thing about the word stigma is it presupposes that it is okay and just somebody's being controlling and nasty and telling you what to do. But that's unfair
Yeah.
on the person giving their opinion. We shouldn't I don't think it's fair to call it a stigma. It can be called a stigma if there's no thought put into the argument. Do you know what I mean? So I'm saying that and I think I have to be careful about not like laboring my points or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is not me trying to convince you 100%, like, but having a discussion at least about these very important topics. So I would say a lot of people, like you might have described it as dark thoughts or something. Some people might get lost in those dark thoughts or aggressive thoughts or
But
whatever,
the point I
because
was
there are a
trying to
lot of
make is
people.
that using
Yeah,
those so-called dark thoughts and channel them into something healthy, that's where you take your shadow self and you channel it. So that's
sure.
what people do. That's what people do with
Some
music, with
people and
writing,
some
with
people
art.
don't, isn't it? There's all sorts of
Well,
people who
that's the
follow that
thing, isn't
stuff.
it? It's like the
Yeah,
people need, I think people need a space sometimes to channel
yeah.
that, you could say, dark energy into something healthy. And that's why we have dance, that's why we have music, that's why we have writing. And I think the danger is that there'll be these institutions who'll say that's evil, and it's like that's where things start to get very,
Hmm.
because again, if Prince, for
At the
example,
same
Prince is
time,
not evil,
everybody's
Prince was
free to do. Yeah, everybody's free to do whatever they want. But I would say certain things are not gonna guide you in a. You used an interesting word that I think I'll quickly touch on. You said spirituality, right? And I think that's become increasingly vague, and maybe that's good. Maybe in some ways that's good, because you don't want people necessarily appropriating and say this is what spirituality or this what. But at the same time, there should be some definition, and the Islamic definition would be what guides you towards your goal, towards God. And so a lot of spirituality nowadays is, I feel this, I'm very spiritual, and then they do, and you can see a lot of their lives. I would say a lot of like a new age spirituality or the new versions of Buddhism, where you can just do anything you want, which is not the real Buddhism. People are really lost, and you can see in their lives that their mental health is not good. They're not at peace. They're easily they're always complaining about, this person said that and this person said that, and I'm so miserable because I got affected by everything that's happening in my environment. That's not a good sign. But they consider themselves spiritual. So my point is that I think we should always keep assessing all these tiny things, like, okay, somebody says they're spiritual, but they don't seem to have much inner peace, although they claim to have inner peace, but they're always complaining and miserable and suicidal. Do you know what I mean? But on the other side, there's another person who said they're spiritual and they have a lot of peace. Maybe I should choose that one. And so I would say the Islamic kind of and this is people who follow Islam according to the Quran rather than Sunni aggressive Islam, or even Ahmadis who might not. I'm an Ahmadi Muslim, and they haven't studied it. People who are trying to stick to what the Quran says, you find that they have more inner peace compared to, let's say, the New Age spiritualists who define spirituality as they want. How do you feel
That's
about
not
that?
what I was actually saying. What I was
Okay.
actually saying was that people naturally have what's known as a shadow side. And I actually think that people who channel that into, say, a healthy place, for example, by playing on a drum, by punching a bag, by writing a
Mm,
horror novel, by creating a science fiction drama, that's healthier. And I think that that is really ultimately what's the purpose of art, is that you take those,
mm.
you can say, darker impulses and you channel that. And that to me is what how shall I say? I think that is actually a part of God's creation. That's why people are given, the genius or whatever. Why people are
Yeah,
given
I would
ability.
agree. I would
Yeah,
agree
because
that
as
the
well,
so
like it's
yeah.
dangerous when we
What is a
when we
dark?
when
What is a dark side that you mean? Because I
well
feel
when
like
we
you're
have a
talking about
shadow
a natural
self.
impulse
Yeah,
that's not being used properly. But give me an
yeah.
example.
Well, again, for example, let's say, for example, somebody has suicidal thoughts. Instead of
Hmm.
hurting themselves, they sit down and they write a story and they write, say, I don't know, psychological crime thriller. And
Right.
they use that. So instead of, and actually that is what brings them peace, and that enables them to connect to God. It's like instead of them going out and hurting people, they sit down and they write a psychological thriller, or they go bang on a drum, or they start a rock band, or they, I don't
Hmm.
know, create colorful clothing, they do like dressing up or
I would
whatever.
say
Yeah,
my if somebody is having suicidal thoughts, that is biological. That's their body telling them there's something wrong, and then they need to find and
a
peace
way
is a
to
better
kind of
direction. Do you mean? So
a
I
way
would
to
say
redirect that energy.
yeah, yeah. It's not yeah. You could call it redirect, or just. It's a good way to go. Oh, something's wrong. Let's figure out. Let's try changing this, changing that until you find more peace. So I suppose I'd agree about that. So as usual, time runs out really quickly, and I want to talk really quickly on some of the other points. I want to roughly keep it to an hour, isn't it? What do you think? Yeah, and then
That's
yeah,
fine.
let's
Did we
just
want to see any of the chats or whatever?
yeah. Nobody's been chatting today, which is really interesting by itself. I think like some of the more useless conversations I have more live stream chat, so it's good. I think there's like an inverse sort of relationship to the quality. The better the conversation, the less interest. But it's not always true. Sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised and more people are interested. But anyway, so as I said in the beginning, I'm not too concerned about that. I'm actually focused on quality rather than quantity, especially more this year than ever. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna share this in a slightly better way. So just the tab, because I think at least you can see more that way. And I'm going to whiz through like the other points I was supposed to make really quickly. Let's go. So there's a detail section, path, why I chose this one. I would just briefly say the Quran says, "This day I've completed my favor on you and made Islam." Islam literally means peace, peace of all kinds, inner peace and outer peace. So outer peace means like peace with nature, for example, peace with human beings. There's inner peace, and also being at one with God, sort of peace. So your true sort of destination, and your religion, Deen, which means guided for life, right? So, very briefly, what is special about this? What I haven't said already. If you look at the names of different religions, they're usually to do with a tribal name. So, for example, Buddhism comes from Buddha, so one particular leader. So, but you'll see Islam is not called Mohammedism. Okay, it tells you on the label, as it were, what's the purpose of it. And so all the other religions were tribal, and it's not like a necessarily a basically what happened in the past before Islam. There wasn't the ability for human beings to be international, and they hadn't developed as well that much. So there was a point in time when we were all cavemen, and so the cavemen rules were a lot more coarse and basic than Islamic rules, which were far more complicated and detailed. So the previous religions are all essentially tribal. Even like Hinduism, your uncle will tell you that, I think he mentioned in the um, uh, some of the live streams, that that's a tribal religion. You can't, it's belonging to a certain group of people. Judaism is very tribal. It's only for the children of Israel. Israel is actually the name of Prophet Jacob, I think. So his children, his 12 tribes. So they were all tribal. And so if you're going to pick a religion, you can't join somebody else's tribe. The best religion is the international one, the one for our times. So there's a lot more that I want to say about that. But how do you feel about that? Like, if you're going to pick a religion that's for everybody, not just for one particular group.
Yeah, but again, I think that what I said does need to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, people will not want to comply, especially the creative people, or the people who, I think, who are the ones
Yeah.
who are, most likely to commit suicide or whatever. The people who perhaps have a greater need to sublimate their shadow self into something that is going to become worthwhile. And again, things
My
like
brief answer, another answer would be that the reason why they're suicidal is because they're living chaotic lives and they need the direction more. And the
yeah, and they need
direction is
somewhere to
not
channel that
suffocating.
chaos into.
Yeah, it's just about channeling it. But we might disagree on what that channeling is, because you might have a point of view. But remember, all our points of view are very limited based on our understanding of the world. So you might say it's essential to be able to play guitar, for example, for certain people. And I might disagree. So how do we know what is essential? Do you know what I mean? So I don't want to get into too much, but that's kind of essentially what the problem is there. Then there's a misconception, which we've kind of talked about already. Proven, we've talked about already. What have we not talked about? So we can, I've already said, don't fight your design. So who knows your design better than the creator? Does that make sense at all?
Why would the
Yeah.
creator create people with the ability to play the guitar? You know what I mean?
So I would say that's an incorrect way of looking at it, because let's say human beings were made with a certain design, and then at that time the guitar didn't exist. So you can't say
You
that
mentioned
we were
cave people
made.
earlier as well. Cave people in the old days, they would have done a lot of drawings on the wall. They would have gotten
Sure.
stones and they would have started banging on the stones or whatever.
Sure. No, what all I'm saying is, let's say you feel that, oh, I was made to make the guitar, because you saw the guitar there and you sort of had an energy and you needed to use that energy somewhere. It's just that you decided that, as far as your knowledge of the world was at that time, that guitar seems to work. But I would suggest that if I was telling, like, I think you play the guitar, we could have a discussion about that. And I think maybe I need to add a chapter on maybe just music or creativity. I really do. And we can talk about, okay, what would be a better outlet? I suppose that's essentially what we're talking about. What is a better outlet than playing a guitar that will make you feel more at peace, and also feel like you're progressing more in life? Would you say?
Playing the guitar is a pretty good outlet, especially for a lot of
Sure. I
people.
mean, right. So what I'm trying to, without trying
Especially
to
for
kind of
people who
label,
aren't creative to understand that sometimes, I think.
I would
Or
say
who
I'm
aren't
creative,
creative.
but we shouldn't say, like, a lot of people say you don't understand because you're not this or that, and then we kind of cut them out of the argument, which is not fair either. So I think the best, I don't want to make it like focus on that too much, but I would like to say, I think we should bring it up at some point, like have I think I've really need to talk about creativity in a whole lesson in itself. And then we should try to objectively work out what's most fulfilling, productive, and giving in a piece. And then whatever gives that objectively as we can, you might say it's not possible, but we can try, isn't it? Then would you say that if you can objectively show something is better for you with all the different dimensions of a human being,
There's
then
been
you
a
should
lot of
follow that
evidence
thing?
to find actually that playing music makes people feel better, that it releases was it like dopamine, that it releases senses of unity as well. And a lot of people as well equate going to a concert as being like
Yeah.
a religious experience. And again, this is
Yeah.
very common, especially in certain genres, again, with the rock genre, the
No,
pop
I
genre.
can
A lot of
understand
people
that.
do
I like
do
music,
like
right?
that.
So the way I would say it's all relative. So it could be one thing and then something even better, right? And I don't want to be the person who says, don't do this. Islam has a philosophy and it goes something like this. It's not like, don't do this. It's more like, hey, how about this? And then maybe don't do that afterwards. Like first it gives a better alternative. So maybe if people could see an even better alternative, then in life we focus on a few things. It's like, okay, what are you going to focus on? What's going to that kind of idea? I mean, does that sound reasonable? At least I don't want it to be sound like a dictatorship. Islam already says there's no compulsion in religion, so everybody's free to do anything they want anyway already. So that's already given, and we shouldn't assume unfairly that Islam is enforcing things on people. It's just like Islam's going to give you an alternative, and when we get to that topic, I think we should talk about that. That'll be really good. Say like, and then you can say, okay, then we'll decide. Then I suppose, is that fair enough, based on some sort of objective measures on what? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
having these discussions are important. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. What else? I'm sorry. I feel like we're always rushing, isn't it? Even when I try not to be rushing. But anyway, yes. But it's kind of what I just said. Islam is logical. It's not about faith. Some people think nowadays faith has been hijacked by illogical people. It's like, oh, you got to believe. Like, no, you don't just blindly believe. Islam is one of the rare religions, if not the only religion, that keeps going throughout the whole Quran. When I say Islam, I'm talking about the Quran. It keeps saying, reflect. What do you think about this? Here's some evidence. It's all about not just telling you what to do, but getting you to think about why those rules are there. So hopefully we'll go into that more often. And I'm not reading all these verses of the Quran where it says, these are signs for people who understand. There's a lot of verses of the Quran that end like that. Easy. I think this is really important because people are put off, like a bit like what you were saying, like people are often controlled and dictated to as to what they should do. And it's like being in prison. And Islam is very different. Islam is very easy to follow. Okay. And it solves problems, really big problems, really easily. So maybe I'm making a lot of claims, but how comes very ordinary Muslims seem to get married so easily, statistically more, and have more children, and they seem to be less stressed, and they're not particularly they're not geniuses or something. So their problems are getting solved easily. Whereas all these geniuses, professors or whatever in the West who don't seem to be able to solve the same problems. There's a massive problem in terms of relationship. There's a massive problem in
Yeah,
terms of
maybe it comes down to the difference in humanity, because as well, I think there's a lot of, I mean, I did use the word stigma earlier, but I think a lot of, you could say, geniuses or people that have a genius, they perhaps they're the ones that feel like they're the most ignored and they're the most sidelined in society. If you have the people who are trying to kind of, I don't
Well,
know,
they've got to choose if they're going to be in a relationship or not. Like, it's not about
no,
being ignored. It's
no,
about
you could be in a
it's not the
relationship.
whole of society. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And okay, last thing. Yeah, it's really useful that it's complete. So I invite people with very different backgrounds, and we've done, I don't know if you were in that particular chat, where I was inviting people to be as Islamophobic as possible. And were you in the one where Stephen James was there and he called Islam autistic?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what he meant by that was it's very precise, got so many rules for everything, right? And so if you picked up a self-help book, you want a self-help book that doesn't just say do anything you want because you got
Yeah,
the book, because
you
you're
also
looking
want
for
the ability
guidance.
to, but
Yeah.
you
So it's
also want the
really,
ability to be yourself, and to not,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So Islam is complete. It helps you in all aspects of your life. It doesn't force you to do anything. Nothing's forced. It's like, if you know how this human being body operates on all the aspects, then life isn't so confusing. Life isn't such a struggle. It's like, oh, this is how you work. This is what makes you happy. You just need to do it. Just do more of it. And the kind of stuff we're talking about is not just rub your nose on the floor and slap your face, all sorts of crazy stuff like that. It's like, be more generous, that kind of stuff. Be kind to your mum. If your parents are being annoying, you're not allowed to say anything rude to them, for example. These might be, some of them might be counterintuitive even, but when we delve into it, we understand, like an example, parents, but as you get older, you get more stubborn, and the world is a very confusing place because the world has changed. So you can't always force people into understanding. Younger people can't always force people into getting their parents to understand. So you sort of arguing with them. Parents want certain things like respect, for example. Yeah. Anyway, I'm kind of sidelining, but I'm just kind of saying that it's a very complete way of life, and people are looking for guidance because there's so much confusion. How do you feel about that last thing? And then
That's cool, but I think as with everything, there's always room for, because if we want people to come to a certain path, we have to take into account different people's needs, and also the important point I made as well about the integration of the shadow with the light, I suppose, to avoid people from being led astray, to actually have people use, whatever gifts they've been bestowed upon in a certain way. Otherwise, people will continue to fight. People will continue to say, "Oh, Islam is evil." They'll say the same thing. Christianity is repressive. That's, again, the critiques will keep on coming up. That makes sense.
yeah, sure. Yep. So we've got our friend Claire of Quranic secularism or secular Quranism or whatever, saying maybe we can use even fewer words. So this year I'm not talking to the masses who can't concentrate for more than 5 seconds. So, but I do try to use less words even then. And then it's not like, yeah. I think I would say I'm following Islam, and secular Quranism is its own version of Islam. It's the other way around, I would argue. But anyway, thank you, Claire, for listening in. Thank you. I think people started listening in more at the end. Do listen to the whole thing afterwards. Hopefully you find it interesting. Give your feedback on the book I'm writing this year. And thank you very much for your time. And thank you, Zarina, for being here. Really appreciate it. So I'll end the
I
stream
feel like we had a lot of disagreements in this stream, but the good thing about you and I is we have the ability to retain stability. I apologize as well. I'm very, 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 very tired.
No, but I think you brought up really important points, like all the whole creativity thing. That's what the West really struggles with in terms of listening to a religion. It's like, no, we don't want to religion. We've got to do this, we've got to do that, and we feel that's an innate part of this, and how are we going to handle it? And those are really important questions. So I really appreciate you bring those points up. I did say in the beginning, yeah, we're a lot more aligned than most other people. But if you were totally aligned, I might as well just talk to myself. Do you mean that would not help? And you're bringing up points that are really useful.
Also, as well, remember, for everybody watching as well, my background is arts. I am an author. I'm, at the end of the day, while I seem to have over the last several months, especially, somehow gotten dragged into all of this religious discussion. My core, I'm an author, I'm a musician, I'm an artist. That's what I am at my core.
Yeah.
And that's really what I am, and I think that that's my true nature. My true nature is I'm an artist, and that's what I am. And that's really a part of the world that I think has been sidelined. My background is I went to a music school where, a lot of people struggled with, anxiety and all these things. And my general firm belief is that music, artistic expression, and again, not people cutting themselves or doing ridiculous things, but just being in the music. Like Santana, talked about how when he was playing his guitar, this feels like touching God. Like all of the great rock artists, I think that if they just concentrated on the music and they just did that and lived in that and used that to connect to God, I don't think they'd be doing cocaine or heroin or whatever nonsense. I think if they just focused on the music and then maybe went and prayed. Like I remember saying to my brother, like, imagine if Jimi Hendrix was a Muslim, or imagine if he was religious in any, he doesn't have to be Muslim. Imagine if Jimi Hendrix was a man of God. If he was like playing his guitar and dressing and being colorful and then going and doing his praying, he wouldn't have been doing acid. He wouldn't have been doing all these stupid drugs. he would have just been, because again, ultimately
Yeah.
music, the way I see it,
I would
is
say his music led him that. So that was
no,
the.
Khaled, no, sorry, I'm gonna that's something
Okay.
I'm gonna be
All
very,
right.
very careful, because this is really I'm quite calm, but when it comes to like
Yeah.
anything involving writing, art, music, I get very angry, especially as well. I really hate to bring this up. I know we're closing soon, but when
Yeah.
I had my fucking spat with Mr. Dawa, I got a bunch of Muslims leaving comments saying, oh, you're a musician. Oh, that's like the most useless thing in the world. Oh, that's like this. One of the people saying my red hair was the devil. That is what really makes people look at religion and go, well, piss off then. When you get people saying things like that, that's what makes people
Sure.
turn off from
No, I'm
religion.
just saying it could be a logical conclusion. But anyway, let's talk about that when we talk about creativity by itself. That would be it's really good that you brought it up, and I will need to fit that somewhere in the book. Maybe you can help me put it in the right place. But anyway, all right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for watching,
Listen,
everybody.
thank you. On the stream now.